personal as the Sorosuke movement, we saw, attempts to capture the narrative. And so for me, SIE, which is social impact entertainment or edutainment, depending on the context, is the medium through which you take all of the things that you desire and you wrap it into this messaging that is subliminal, right? So goes to what Daniel says about being changed without realizing it. Because if you think about it, nobody wants to watch any film content that is preachy, or it's all, oh, go and change, or you need to be a better person, or you need to do X, Y, Z to make your country better. Nobody cares about that. And if you think about the population of this country, with 70% of the population being so young, you know that their attention span is really short. So embedding that messaging in highly entertaining content is what we strive for. But when you've embedded that message in there, how you get people to not just enjoy it and maybe go past the message is where the tricky bit is. And so for us, those narratives, we have to hold them and not A, let it be captured, or B, let it get lost on the audience, which to my mind is even a bigger crime than even letting it get captured. And so as far as impact narratives go, the goal is to consistently make sure that the message is targeted specifically to the audience that can get a call to action out of it, and then use that information to drive the kind of change that we want to see perpetuated in society.
I think let's break it down just beyond the buzzwords of narrative and change and impact. What are the specific, Daniel, you can go first. What are the specific narratives, if we're using just headline as to what we're trying to drive? What does that look like to you?
I think around the entire global conversation, at the heart of it is a very basic thing: identity. Before we became the people who now have technologies and tools and things, we were first the people. And these people had systems. And these systems created environments that actually defined presets of which we had to make certain changes and actually grow as people. But with the evolution of time came a lot into our spaces, technologies, and somehow we've forgotten who we were. We've forgotten how we were communal, how we were able to fellowship with other. Before we got into the digital age, all of these are foundational building blocks that actually laid around our identity. Now we live in an age whereby you are a click away from somebody who's a billion miles across the world. And why that has been amazing, some of those erosion has taken away the basic core of our true identities. And sometimes in speaking to connect to who you are, or even recognizing where you should go next, it actually brings to top of mind awareness, right? Things of, okay, so who were we before? We were not the people who actually put guns to each other's throats. We're people whereby you see a village, they actually collectively bring up monies and actually to send one child to school. We're people who actually put other people's interests first. We're not the people who led by greed. So sometimes at the top of mind of those conversations, the basic heart of it stays in the identity of who you truly were, which recalls you back to your roots and actually bring the good side of you, the inner nature of you that was actually predisposed to actually thinking about the welfare of others. Because at the heart of that intention, bring forth every other good thing you seek for, whether be it making changes and impact in places that matters, or leading with whatever gesture you have, because it all comes down to the basic intention behind that actions. And it actually ties down to the identity which we've all forgotten, that now we are just thinking, oh, there is now the generation of the Z, the millennials, the baby bloomers, and all of that. We have now separate identity. But at the core of it, we were once people, because we've walked this path before. Just because we do not remember does not mean we do not know who we were. So I think reminding ourselves true stories, if you look at the greatest story ever told biblically, we never lived through those eras. But through the words that were captured on pages, we get to experience what we thought they were experienced. It is wild to wake up and imagine that in the entire biblical story, somebody wake up, there were about 200 people, and there was a pillar of fire that came down from earth. We do not have the science to explain that. And there was a pillar of cloud that came down on the other side. You do not have the science to explain. But we are left with these wild imaginations that this existed before us. On our own cultural roots, we have ancestral stories. I have personal stories of how my dad, my great-grandfather, goes through doors when he's about to go through long trips. He takes packages and he will tell them he'll be back in 2 days, and he walks through those doors and he actually arrives at the destination of where he's going and come back to do it like transportation. These are things that are lost to the ethos of time, that are all forgotten in space. And these are things some of us try to remind us at the foundation of the intentions that led to several good developments. And it's that intention that brings forth every other social conversation that builds around the blocks of change, around how we try to like pull back, like just for a second, slow down and actually remember, who were you before this? And that's actually how it has actually begun.
I see that you're shifting. You want to add to that, and I want you to add to it in the context of how, you know. Okay, I think they were back now. But I wanted you to comment on that just off the back of marrying who we were versus who we are now, but through the eyes of civic responsibility. Because a big part of what has shifted over the years is the way that we interpret civic responsibility. And just tying that back to what film does, in that regard.
So if you think of the 60s, the 70s, and the 50s, those were really romantic periods in the way that young people in Africa took charge and used the civic space to try to get power, be it from the colonialists or even just try to get into areas of responsibility after the independence period. And so if you think about how we as young people today, well, I'm not young, the young people, and people like myself who are old, who are supporting all of that effort, if you think about how they move today, you can see stark similarities, which ties back to what Daniel was saying about each of us having a story inside us. Like, as far as you're African, you sat down by your grandmother's feet, you heard some amazing stories, you heard about some amazing thing someone in your family did. There's a crazy story I told Daniel recently about my grandfather in a cave, and so hearing him talking about his grandfather and that travel, these are stories that stay with us, right? But in the civic space, if you see young people engaging, it's heavily with technology now. The thing that what our stories try to do when we tell them is, how do you bring people who do not have access to technology, people who are in, I don't know, rural communities, urban slums, who do not necessarily have the money to buy the kind of data that people who have access to that kind of information do. And so a big part of how we think about the work we do is how we also disseminate it. So it's fantastic if you can think up a narrative that is relevant to the times and can inspire young people to action, but it's also critical how you disseminate it. And we talk a big game about how technology moves things, and it's true. But we also have to keep reminding ourselves of the last mile audiences who do not have access to this. And so think about ways like radio. For example, in northern communities, it will shock you that they really have more access to radio, traditional radio transistor devices, which spreads far more information than any other in that climb, right? And that's why the BBC has a solid service that is out there in Hausa in that region. It's for a reason. And if you think about other ways, community organizing, right, is one way that, if young people are trying to move things, right, in the urban areas, they can organize to find better ways to engage people who are in the last mile communities who do not have access to the kind of information that they do. And I say this because I personally am very interested in movements. And I ask myself about the most successful movements in the world all the time, and I try to read about that. And I ask myself a simple question: why have the movements we've seen in this country not gone far? So, for example, talk about, be it Occupy Nigeria, be it the Sorosoke movement, like the fire is there. You see the hope, and then you're like, my God, this is the one that drives that change we're seeking. This is the one that really shakes things up. And then give it the time, and it fizzles out and implodes on itself. And the question we asked ourselves, why? And the answer we came up with after a ton of research and speaking to people in the civic space and speaking to people who have led this movement and looking at other movements internationally, the answer was simple. The structure was always one-sided. So if you think of Nigeria as a whole, and when we speak of change and we want that change to be change that resonates across board, that movement needs to be something of a network that has partnerships and has people and members across board, across cultures. It cannot be a Lagos thing. And you can think about Soro Circuit, that was such a huge one that we all thought was going to, in the end, people in the north or in the east said it was a Lagos movement, and people then in fact, some people ended up saying, oh, it was to take Buhari out, and we all know that's not true, but it made sense as a propaganda to promote because the loopholes were there. And so narratives need to go beyond how we feel or how we think about what's going on in the moment to how we engage people who traditionally are disenfranchised and do not have access to the kind of information that people who are at the center or in urban communities do. And so for me, the current stories I'm telling are heavily tied towards how you create networks, how you keep those networks alive, and how you create characters that have the fire to drive movements to the desired ending that we want to see.
Yeah, speaking of networks and just gaps, right? There is a very huge gap, generational gap in terms of narrative for social change. So you have the younger people who don't know enough about what the older people did in that regard. Absolutely. And then you have the older people who don't understand enough, you know, what the younger people are trying to do now. I'm thinking about how, like, a lot of the things I know about the American civic movement or social change or film for democracy is just through the entertainment medium. So if it's not in books, it's in a film. How can we use film to bridge that generational narrative gap when it comes to social change? And I want Daniel to go first and then you.
So at the heart of that question speaks to me inclusivity. Because when people are inspired, they're inspired because they see themselves in certain places. They could dream themselves living certain lives and certain characters. So for us that actually work in film, right, to inspire those changes, right, we build characters and systems, which are makeshift worlds that people can experientially travel for a 2-hour window, a 1-hour window to be able to see how they go from their birth to how they solve the problem. And as soon as those people begin to see themselves in those characters, right, or how it is being told, it begins to fill in the gaps, the stop gaps in building trust, hiding identity, bringing them to the conversation. Those who were before us, right, what they did right, how we could do better, how we could optimize the system. Those who were after us, right, what they could learn from those that were before us, and how they could see the synergy in combining strengths as opposed to thinking we are all could stand alone. Because some of these loopholes that exist is because there's a certain disregard from the new generation who believes that, okay, so we've caught up on the new trends, we could complete things faster as a result, we do not need you who came before us. And the wisdom that and the wealth of the generations of those before us are like lying at the beck and keep on, or the call of those who are actually after us to say, okay, come to the table, let's see how you could take what we've learned and transfer it over to you and see how we could actually make a more unified structures. So in a certain way, we as filmmakers have the responsibility in creating those walls that addresses those stop gaps that actually bridge the trust. For example, you could have a character in your film that's out of the randomness of my head, an old guy who's representing a status of power and a new guy who represents the new wave that's to come. And for the fact in your own story, you have the new guy giving the old guy a chance to be able to see how they could benefit from those words. The people who get to experience those kind of journeys starts yearning for leadership structure, mentorship structures that they could actually believe in and actually like see how they could couple those stop gaps in their reality and see if they could recreate those words. Because as a man thinketh in his heart, so he is. So for the fact you've been able to show them, you've been able to show that it's actually possible, then the realities begins to like take shape, they actually sculpt the world because they are unintentionally influenced by the experience they have experienced. And by the law of nature, we would yield.
Yeah, Yeah, so I mean, it's worth noting that there is, Daniel, an inherent distrust, right, between these two generations, and it's not baseless, right? This young people have seen these past generations let them down multiple times, and the question would now be, how do we sieve, right, the people who are worth taking notes from? I think that's a really critical thing to look out for because you're right, there's a tendency for the younger generation to think of the old guard as being the corrupt one and having nothing to offer. And I think the tax will be in how we sieve the people to take notes from. And because, I mean, I used to think that way until I went further in to do some work in civil society and worked closely with governments. Imagine my shock when I started finding people who worked in government who were straight shooters, would never take a bribe, would stand for the truth, and they're few and far between. And I guess the question would be the things that young people don't want to hear, which is you yourself would have to go in there into the civil service and form a critical mass, or else all of those changes are going to be, how do the kids call it, voice notes or voicemail?
Voicemail.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, let's, please, we're going to take questions. So if you have any questions, you can prepare them and raise your hands, and we'll take, I think, it by a couple before we go on. But I wanted us to, just before the questions start rolling in, I wanted us to talk about what you're currently working on. What are the, you don't have to share, but what are the specifics in terms of themes and just in terms of narratives, that you're trying to propagate with the work that you're currently doing?
So specifically, like I mentioned earlier, I am interested in movements because we've seen movements change things across the world in other places, and I'm convinced we can adapt that formula and do the same here in Nigeria. So the last election gave me a lot to think about, and so a year and a half before the elections happened, we did a scan, and we said, what's most likely to happen? We know that young people have deep voter apathy, right? And so it's one of two things. One, they come out en masse and really change things, or everybody's just giving up and they lay in bed and just drink ice cream on election day. And we created this world where it was this network of people who went into community organizing, went into the civic space, found people who they trusted, encouraged them to run for office, and supported them. But more than anything, they found the places that mattered, because we tend to think of politics in this country as being mainly the president and the governor. And we go into the legislative arm, explaining to young people that, look, if you want power, that's all good and fine, but the policies and the laws that are going to support you and give you the backbone that you need to end up where you want to be is in the legislative arm. And if you don't have the firepower to run for governor's office and support those kind of big hitters, the obvious place to go to is the legislative arm. And so we created a world where a bunch of passionate characters create a world where they take their own destiny into their hands and choose the leaders that they want, give them the support that's required, and we see them flourish, not without the dangers, of course. So a lot of thriller, but it's a political thriller, a 4-part series coming soon.
All right. Daniel?
It's a case of being the change you want to see, you get. Politics in large view has been dealt as it's a dirty game. So if you really want to be a clean game, let's get a couple of clean guys in there that could actually do the cleaning. So it actually encapsulates a lot of what she said, but with plot twist and, I don't know, heightened moments, you get like the trailer version bits. But in the sense, at the heart of it all, it actually is supposed to, by the time you've completed this journey, inspire you to actually see there's actually a method to the madness. There's a step guide to the process you get. Because there's this large educational gap that exists because we do not know how to actually solve critical conversations. So should a young person decide to say, okay, I'm going to wake up, become a counselor in my neighborhood, who do I turn to? Where's the first place to fill the form? Those kind of educational gaps exist that is not actually communicated properly, you get, if they decide to take on different shapes, you get. So these are the kind of knowledge gaps that we try to address, you get, and also why actually taking them on a wild ride, so yeah.
All right, so it's time for the Q&A session. There's a hand there. There's one. There's another here. Okay, so we're going to take both questions at once and then try to answer them.
Okay, hi everyone. My name is Mariam. So I've heard a bit about like the political narrative, right? But one thing I will give to Hollywood is how they shape the values of their country and the perception of their country to the world. In a lot of Hollywood movies, the bad guys always have an accent. Like right now, you find the bad guys have Russian or Chinese accents, right? Because America is not on good terms with Russia and China. So even in terms of how they present themselves, the land of the free, the land of opportunity, we found out that it may not exactly be that when Trump won elections and the kind of supporters that Trump had. So Nigeria now, we're exporting our movies like no other African country. Even other countries outside the continent haven't been able to do what we've been able to do with our movies and our, shows. So is it realistic to expect, I think my question is, do you think Nollywood and Kannywood and all the other sources of our movies can determine what our values are? Because I do think there's a values issue in Nigeria, because you talked about bribery and how people are, the people who don't take those things are few and far in between. So is it realistic to expect Nollywood to shape what Nigeria's values are and how we export that into the world?
All right, so let's take the second question. You can note that, and then we'll answer both questions at the same time.
Hi. Okay. Sorry, I raised my hand also, but let him take. Okay. Hello everyone. My name is Tolu Adetunji, and I really like what you said, Delmwa. Yeah, about governance, and I'm looking forward to your new project. I've worked in the private sector and I've also worked in government, and I have seen that Nigerians expect otherwise from government, and we do not hold ourselves accountable as citizens. So there's that cognitive dissonance where we expect a lot of moral uprightness and righteousness and correctness from the people in power, but if we look within ourselves, it's not there. So how do you think that the movie industry can start to expose us to look inwards, to introspect and see ourselves in these people, and not always point fingers and say they're corrupt when we're also corrupt? I mean, we're cheating our employers, we're doing side hustles, and we're not ensuring that the private sector is thriving. Or for civil servants who would not go to work, would take one entire week for Salah break or for Christmas holiday that's supposed to be 2 days, and they do not want to hold themselves accountable. Thank you.
All right, so, okay, we'll come back. Just briefly answer those two so that Daniel will take the first one and you'll take the second.
I actually want to address a bit of the first one. Sorry,
Okay.
just a little bit. So, absolutely, it's a fair expectation to expect that Nollywood should play a role in how we're viewed internationally. But it's also important to note that what you see with American media that is expressed in a way that we all think America is wonderful and great is a 120-year project. And everyone is involved, from the filmmakers to the finance industry to the government itself. J. Edgar Hoover, for example, is the reason why you think of the FBI in the way that you do. The FBI and the police were literally on the same level, but Hoover paid people in Hollywood to make the FBI guys look cool and wear trench coats and just look like the great guys. And next thing, when you think of the FBI, they are cooler than the police. It is by design. Everything that you see happening in America, the government funds banks to fund Hollywood so that certain types of stories are told. And I mean, all of us are disappointed when we get to Fifth Avenue or Hollywood or wherever. It's like, is this it? But they do a good job of selling. And I recognize that, yes, we do have a responsibility. However, it needs to be a well thought out, integrated response, right? And just Nollywood by itself cannot do it. And these are conversations that I think there are new people who are thinking in that direction. And so Absolutely. You have I've once asked what the job of the National Orientation Agency is, and it turns out it is to do exactly what you speak of. However, the, the actions that would need to be taken are so vast that even if today we started to tell stories that started with Nigeria is good from beginning to end, if it's not well distributed, if it doesn't get to the right markets, if it's not placed in front of the right kind of people, we're still going to end up exactly where we are. So I'd say let's take it as a personal responsibility and do the most we can on our individual level, wherever we are, and just represent the country well. And we on our end will keep trying to do what we can till we all get our act together, because unless we do that, we're going to be doing a 360 for a minute.
Yeah, do you maybe want to talk about the second question so Daniel can go at once?
Oh, no, Daniel, you go first.
In regards to her question, I'll just chip a bit, right? You have to bear in mind that Nollywood did not exist as a design construct. It came as a result of people, independent people who had broader reach, pushing the envelopes the best way they know how. So it would be a huge thing to look at them as an industry, but rather as an individual ecosystem that was spurred up by desire to be able to push certain narratives. And from that perspective, you understand that there's not a lot of cohesion in terms of having like a global view to attack things. You get. Definitely things could actually grow and change in certain perspective, but that would have to take a designed agenda to be able to have such kind of focused goal to like, it's almost like saying if you want to rebrand who's in Nigeria. If you go out there, we are thought of as the most smartest creature you could ever meet. Like, when you say Nigerian, he's always going to go into the system and he's going to come up on top. It doesn't there's nothing going to set against him. That's how we've been designed. So, and that has been from people who have experienced certain exploits that we have done, both in the great light and in the bad light, you get. So to have those kind of conversations repurposed would have to take a communal effort, not just like from the individuals, because right now we're just like an independent ecosystem and not like an industry that has like terms and focus goals and laws, and we can say, okay, this year we're trying to like focus on this and get this message across and that. So a lot of that would have to still happen because at heart, we're still very young system. Like the term Nollywood is still a very infant child compared to those that exist before it. You get, if you go into other systems such as, leave Hollywood aside, go look at Bollywood. It's a certain design. There must be music. The music must be a certain kind of way. There are rules. There are things. It is already shaped out. And we understand when we see Bollywood films, oh, that's what we're about to expect. So, yeah, at heart, you may be a bit patient with them. Yes, my good sir.
Okay. Does someone want to comment or? Yeah.
No, it's more of a question for both of them. My name is Abdul Karim. I'm just wondering, I'm all for the art of it, but I'm wondering in your individual, corners, what do you do about stuff like the welfare of the crew, like fair wages, safe working conditions, things like that. I've literally never heard anything mentioned about that.
I would happily take you on that because I speak from a place of put your money where your mouth is. I say that for myself because I can't speak for the entire industry. You get. I'm a director cinematographer that works basically in commercials and film, and some of the ways I have personally pushed that conversation because if you say change begins, it has to begin with you. I can't point at the next filmmaker and say, these are my expectations of him, but I can tell you what I have done. Yes, exactly. So in my own crew, right, we do our very best to stay within the 12-hour windows, right? And as to compensation, you could pick up the phone and call any one of them. Their rates are as close to the available international rates. It's not because we can afford it. Now, the thought process that informs what I do is, okay, so for example, my gaffer, right? I want him to do, forgive me, I'm about going a little bit technical. Larger light protocols, DMX programming, but he has to be able to eat, have the funds to purchase data, have the extra funds from his wages to purchase the training, to become useful to me at that level, so that we could go to the client and say, here's why we can charge more, because we can do this. So in a way, my perspective is, if you want to stay stunted, you could cheat your crew because they're like the foundation of your life. If you want to really push the envelope and actually push them to be surrounded by great individuals, right, you have to empower them way more than you. You get. And in my own small space, right, we organize workshops, we do group trainings. The other trainings we can't afford. We'll pull cash together and say, okay, we're pulling together for this training and everybody has to go take it. You get. For example, everybody in my camera team, Steadicam is like a thing whereby you'd have to specifically train for it, right? But it's almost like a prerequisite. Whether you need it or not, just learn it, just know it. Here's the training, this is how we've got it, you get. And we go through this, because it's almost, I believe in creating systems, because that's the way I know how to solve issues. I don't like solutions that are personally attached to me, you get. Because at the end of the day, one person can only just do one good, you get. But creating a system whereby it could deliver results after result that are consistent, that you could slowly optimize over time, are the ways I try to see things. And as a result, that's how I've been able to push that conversation in my own personal space that I can speak to, that you can confirm, you get. So thank you very much, my good sir.
All right, thank you very much. We're finally going to take your question now. Then you. Please, can we get a mic there?
Comments you said earlier, Delmwa, about young people having an opportunity to serve or impact in the public service, as well as the Latin Jaconde Leadership Academy is. So we have the Nigeria Jubilee Fellowship too. That being said, we're aware that it's safe to say the millennials and the older generations are already done. Like already built. By done, I mean they already built. The mindset is already stuck. Now, I'm more concerned about the younger ones, starting from the Gen Z downwards. Now, by that, I'm saying the media sector is really big and really impacts, the impact level is really high. So what I'm saying is, what can you do, or how much can you impact your team or colleagues to help push out a narrative of a better Nigeria, even if it starts from animations that kids can watch, and while growing up, they see a better Nigeria, and it's hard to convince us that Nigeria is good and let's do this compared to the younger ones. I think if we can build them, the next 20, 30 years, chances are better that Nigeria will be better.
All right, so that's the last question. Unfortunately, that's the last question we can take today. But just so we wrap on that, I want you to be able to tie that with whatever call to action you have for everybody here today. Yeah.
I mean, you speak to something that's really close to my heart. There's no children's content in Nigeria, and that's because it doesn't make money on the level that entertainment content does. And that's something that I know someone who is really passionate about this, that we're trying to work out stuff for in the industry, but it would need to literally be pro bono, right? And if you look at countries that are being that are being named to be the future global leaders, China, they invest heavily in molding the mindsets of children early. If you look at countries like Japan, there's a reason why everybody in Japan is polite and everybody's very put together. They start watching content about kindness and about how to behave in the public space from when they're 2, 3 years old. And so what you speak to really is the major rescue mission that we need to take and conduct so that this country can be rescued for the long term. And as to how this gets done, for now, honestly, as the industry stands, pro bono. So we need more people like you to align with more people like myself and Ufoma Ejanobo, who I know is working in this space heavily, and see what can be done. And like you said, animations, best fantastic way to start. Put it out there on YouTube so parents can access for free, whatever. But it's really something to think about, and I hope that everybody in this room really takes that seriously and can find ways to, you know, put out children's content out there, because we have nothing but beavers and buttheads on TV for kids.
So I would say, in my own, if I have any last words, would be the change you want to see. And I say that in the aspect of it's all about creating systems that can try. Because while we have these big dreams and hopes, they are baseless without the people who can support that infrastructure to deliver those qualities. So why I am privileged to sit down here and take this mic and speak to you, there's the cameraman, the gaffer, the light guys, the sound guys that needs to actually be at or above my level to be able to bring those dreams I'm actually speaking to you about to life. And without the system, it's just cheap talk, because talk is cheap. And I am big on systems, but if we all do our own little 1 cent in every way, like I tell my crew, I do not need all of you to perform at 100%, just 1% better than yesterday. And the cumulative of that percentage will actually come to a sum of 100 at the end of the day. And that's what I would leave you with also. Be the best at what you want to be. Thank you very much.
And for me, it will be step out into the civic space and please engage with the people who are doing community organizing. And for every young person sitting in this room, I'm telling you things that I have seen firsthand, that you have the responsibility to create the world that you want, because these old people, they've already, they have money for the most part, they are sorted. You are the people that are going to be living in this country mostly for the next 40, 50, 60 years. And so really, it's your baby. Step into the civic space, organize, form political parties, form networks, make sure your network has some kind of national reach. You're not going to build it overnight, but start and build relationships across board. And just learn from the old guys. You see a guy who has influence in Kaduna, has relationships in Maiduguri, in Enugu, and Lagos. How is that person not going to win politically? But you're shouting in Lagos alone. You're on your own. You'll be doing 360. Form networks that are nationally relevant. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. I think, thank you very much. Finally, just before they get us off the stage, I just want to say this. There's no form of art that survives without the support of its audience. And so we're here, we're listening to people talk about the narratives that they are trying to push through books, through films. And nothing is really going to have the effect that we need it to have if none of us support it. And by supporting, we don't just mean coming on social media to talk about it. We mean actively like engaging with the material, sharing the material with people, not pirated copies, sharing actual materials with people and paying for these things. We need to continue to show proof of concept for these people to get encouraged to do more, and for the work that we do to bear fruit, because they have taken root in the audience. So thank you very much for listening to this session. We've thoroughly enjoyed ourselves. Thank you.